Welcome to Education Today. Our program deals with one of the most important and controversial topics of our time, education, a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that touches the lives of every citizen every day. For nearly 20 years, we've talked with educators, students, and others with a stake in education in an effort to explore the latest trends and issues in the world of education, as well as to monitor the ever-changing educational landscape. I'm your host, Dan Angelo, and today my guest is Dr. Jeffrey Bennett, who is an astrophysicist and an author, and is author, more importantly, of the recently released updated version of Math for Life, Crucial Ideas You Didn't Learn in School. Dr. Bennett, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Dan, for having me on.
Now, let's start with your book, Crucial Ideas You Didn't Learn in School. And I am probably an example of what I'm probably the demographic you had in mind when you wrote this book in terms of math skills and what wasn't learned. So let's start with the question, what didn't I learn in school and why didn't I learn it?
Well, what you didn't learn in school, what most people don't learn in school, is what you're supposed to do with math beyond the calculations. And the analogy I like to use is to building a house, right? The way we teach mathematics in school is kind of like they teach you all the carpentry skills and, the hammer and nail stuff, but they never teach you how to actually put the entire house together and what you're going to do with it. And mathematics is a very, very rich subject in many, many ways, but in particular from the standpoint of what the role it plays in our lives in modern society. Mathematics is involved in everything we do. When you're trying to decide on what health plan you need, that's a mathematical question when you're analyzing the different policies, what your probabilities of having different types of health events that might cause you to, use your deductible, not use your deductible, all those types of things. When you're purchasing an airline ticket and you've got all these different choices of things. But then even more broadly, things like our national economic policies, our tax policies, population growth, energy. You can't understand any of these things unless you know how to think about the mathematical issues involved in them. And in school, we teach kids how to calculate, and as you know, we don't even do a particularly good job of that oftentimes. But we teach them how to calculate, how to do algebra, if they get far enough, how to do calculus. But we miss out on telling them why that's so important and how it's going to play into the context of our society. And that's the part that should have been taught in school, but very rarely is.
Well, and I'm probably not a good example of what is being taught today because when I was being taught, it was when the earth was still cooling. But what we were told was that how are you going to know if you're getting the right change at the grocery store if you can't do basic math? Clearly that didn't even cut it at the time because, I could figure out the change at the grocery store even as I was struggling with basic algebra in high school. But it sounds to me that what you're describing is more a mindset or a way of thinking about the world that is different than what some of us have acquired.
Absolutely. I think, for your audience who's familiar with educational policy, they may have heard this term that we use called quantitative reasoning. And that's really what I'm talking about here with this Math for Life that you didn't learn in school. And the idea is that, the calculations are one thing, but the other part of it is knowing what to do with them and how to reason with them, how to think through the mathematical ideas that are behind things. And the nice thing about quantitative reasoning is it actually doesn't require much in the way of calculation or algebra or anything like that. If you look through my book, you won't find any equations in this math book. It's about how to think about the ideas that are behind it. And so quantitative reasoning is the skill that people really need in modern society, both for the personal decisions, way beyond the change at the supermarket, like we talked about a moment ago, the healthcare decisions, the airline ticket decisions, and so on, and then the societal ones that affect the way we vote. And we need to be educated in making those decisions, and sadly, we often aren't, and that shows up when you see the kinds of national problems that we have.
Well, you're absolutely right. I am not long on math, but I do follow politics a bit, and I'm oftentimes absolutely somewhere between flabbergasted and stunned at the margins by which things pass or don't. When you think, we're talking about adults here. Can't they see that, whatever that might be? But let's talk about this, because there is this push in education today in K-12, pushing the calculation. And I think what you're saying is that is important, but that isn't the whole picture. So if in math classes students are being taught how to calculate, where in the curriculum should this issue of quantitative reasoning, this, if you will, almost a philosophical viewpoint, where should that be taught?
Well, it goes right alongside it, but it also goes broader, because one of the nice things about quantitative reasoning is that it's involved in every subject you can think of. It's even involved in history and social sciences, right? And so once you start teaching the students to think in this way, teachers across the curriculum can make use of these ideas. But I want to go on that point you were making about the where would it fit in and why. My personal mantra when it comes to education that I use whenever I'm writing, speaking, or anything is what I call education, perspective, and inspiration. And the idea is that education, we think of as this content we want our students to learn, but why should they learn it? And the reason they should learn it is because if we do a good job, it changes their perspective on things in the world around them. And that part makes it worth learning, but you still need to make a real effort to learn. So in order to get that education and perspective, you have to inspire your students to want to make that effort to learn these things. And what quantitative reasoning, these ideas of how math is used in society, really does is it gives students a reason to learn the other parts of mathematics. So as you mentioned, the calculation that we tend to focus on in school, it's not done all that well. A lot of students don't learn algebra well. And you might actually get them to learn it a lot better if you put it in the context of these important issues.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I have, and again, I will use myself as an example. At the root of this, it seems to me that there are people who are naturally good at math and those for whom any math capabilities has to be acquired. It doesn't come naturally. And I sort of derive that from, my background and my education in my youth was in music. And there are certain people out there who are just born musicians, and certain people who, with a great deal of effort, can learn to play the piano, but that's about as far as it's ever going to go. Is that an accurate, in your opinion, is that an accurate perception? Are there people who have a proclivity for math, the thought patterns necessary for math, and those who don't? Or is this strictly, is it nature or is it nurture?
Well, interestingly enough, that statement that you just made, if you look at that in a global context, reveals you to be an American.
I don't deny that at all.
That, by and large, that there is this sort of innate capability towards mathematics. If you look at other countries around the world, and particularly the ones that vastly outperform us in mathematics, people there do not believe that. They believe that everyone can learn mathematics, and that, and they do. And in fact, there's all kinds of research that's been done on this. I was just reading an article, I think in fact, it was a New York Times editorial a couple days ago about math education on Sunday, and they were pointing out some of this research that's been done with girls and math, where they find that if they tell the girls that they're just as good at math as boys are, guess what? They perform that way. If they tell them they're not, then they don't. And so Americans, we've got this serious problem right now where we've come into what's really a self-fulfilling prophecy. We've decided that there's only some people good at math and it must not be me, and therefore we don't learn it. Whereas if we had a better attitude about it from the start, I think we would find that actually it's not that much innate. It's mostly something that you can learn, and if you make the effort, everybody can learn it. Now, different people will learn at different rates, and, not everyone is going to be able to win the Nobel Prize in economics for inventing game theory or whatever else. But, that's like in your music analogy, I like to think of it in the not everyone is Mozart, right? But everyone can understand Mozart's music and enjoy it. And the same is true with mathematics. You may not be the person who's going to invent some new form of mathematics, but you can certainly understand what's out there and how it impacts your life.
Well, and there is an epilogue to my story. I had as I look back on it, a very deficient offering of math in my educational experience through high school and college, and was not very. I didn't feel cheated. I just wasn't interested and took what I had to. And at the time, the standard was rather low. Now, when I got into grad school and I was facing statistics, I remember driving home from class the first night of my stat class and almost in tears thinking that this was the end of my graduate school experience, because there's no way. And the reality was, the end of the story was that I ended up finishing that class the top statistician in the class. Something clicked. I was able to rise to the occasion and acquired whatever skills were necessary to pass it with the top grade in the class. So that lends credence to what you were just saying, that it isn't inbred. It's a matter of being taught. I think the challenge in our educational system is to make it interesting, and I think that's exactly what your book is about, to make it relevant.
That's right. It's that kind of perspective and inspiration piece. And statistics works for a lot of people, as you found, because it's almost always taught in context of something that you're going to be using it for. It's giving you that perspective. You're inspired to understand what's going on because you can see the value in it. So we do a pretty good job of that in statistics, but we don't do such a good job of it in other areas of mathematics.
If you just happen to join us, you're listening to Education Today. My name is Dan Angelo, and today my guest is Dr. Jeffrey Bennett, who's an astrophysicist and an author, and most importantly for this discussion, the author of the recently released updated edition of Math for Life, Crucial Ideas You Didn't Learn in School. So let's talk about this inspiration piece. How do we position this? How do we turn this train around, if you will, so that educators can make math more winsome, more relevant, more inspiring?
Well, I think there's actually some really good news on this front, at least in principle, which is that the new Common Core standards for mathematics that recently have been released and adopted by, I think, 20-something states so far. The Common Core standards really do focus on this idea of the quantitative reasoning alongside the calculation. So if you read through those standards, I've read through them, I think they're actually quite good. And the key is, can we actually carry them out in practice? It's one thing to put all these nice principles on paper. It's another thing to put them into practice in the classroom. But if we can, then I think they provide a great guideline for how to go about this in terms of integrating throughout the curriculum. Now, I do also want to mention that there's two, maybe three pieces to this. One is, the math that we teach to everybody as they're coming up through elementary and middle school, and those Common Core standards address that very well. Now, as you get into high school, people start to track a little bit more in math, and you go on to algebra, maybe you go on to calculus, and those are very utilitarian courses for people who are going into, say, science or engineering as majors and as careers. So there's not as much freedom to change the way we teach those as there is at the lower levels. But then you also have your students who maybe aren't headed in that direction. And for them, you want to make sure that you really start to focus in on the quantitative reasoning. So I'm an advocate of, for example, in high school, you should have 4 years of mathematics. You should get through algebra, because even if you don't think you like algebra and you don't think you want to be an engineer, you might change your mind and we should make sure you're prepared to do that. But when you get to your senior year, you should have a choice of going further in algebra or calculus or going into a quantitative reasoning course. And the same in college for our general education requirements. There's no point in having students in college take algebra again when they already took it in high school. Let's have them do quantitative reasoning where they're doing something that's new and real. So I think there's some real curriculum changes that we could make that would have an impact.
For a non-math person, that makes total sense to a guy like me. But let me shift gears a little bit. Anybody who's listened to this program for any amount of time knows that one of my issues is teacher training. It seems unreasonable to expect major changes in the educational dynamic if we continue to teach college students who want to become teachers in the same way that they've always been taught. So what are the implications for the teacher training piece of what we've been talking about?
Well, I think there's two pieces for me there. Number one is we want to make sure that the teachers all get training in quantitative reasoning because that's what they can take back to their students. But number two is we also need to make sure that our teachers are good at math. And by good at math, I don't mean great, but I mean, even if you're teaching kindergarten, your students are going to be learning algebra in 8 or 9 years. You should know where they're going. You should be able to do algebra too as a teacher so that you can help be pointing them in the right direction. And even more important than that, you need to be transferring a good attitude about mathematics to them. One of the saddest studies that I've seen recently showed that teachers, elementary teachers, are actually perhaps the most math-phobic group in the United States. 40% of them admit to saying that they're bad at math. And to me, the statement, I'm bad at math, is a social disease. When you say it, you spread it to the next person who then thinks it's okay to say it too. Or you make your kids think, hey, you're a teacher, I like you, so if you're bad at math, it's okay for me to be bad at math. And that is a horrible, horrible thing, a terrible disease to be spreading to our kids. So we've got to get away from that and teach teachers that no matter how they actually feel about their own mathematical skills, that they're going to present it to their kids in a positive way and tell them that everyone can be good at math. And it just takes that effort. It's not an inborn skill, and help everyone to succeed.
That is fascinating because that becomes the new paradigm. That creates the new, hopefully self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. And the bad at math thing, sorry to go on with it, but it drives me crazy. You have probably seen in the very first chapter of the book, I start out with a multiple choice question where you imagine a very successful businesswoman coming up to you at a meeting or something and saying a variety of statements. And would she say, I don't know how to read, or I'm bad at reading? Or would she say, I'm bad at critical thinking? Or would she say, I can't really understand how to write? She wouldn't say any of those things. And yet we hear people say, I'm bad at math all the time, without any embarrassment, without feeling shamed by it. And that's a problem in society. We need to make sure that bad at math is considered to be a bad thing, not a good thing.
No, I think you're absolutely right. What I tell people is math is not my thing, but if you want me to define and describe a narrative arc in your novel, I'm your guy. So a slightly different spin on the same issue.
Right.
So what do we do? What, as a society, do we need to do to set up this new paradigm, to create the new self-fulfilling prophecy? Because, as you alluded to, there was a news item in I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, reporting out that we are, as there was no surprise there, woefully behind the rest of the developed world in our students' ability to perform mathematically. So what do we do? What are the next steps that we have to take to turn this around?
Well, I think, like you said, the teacher training is a big, big part of it. But I also think it's parent training and social training, which is the main reason I wrote this book, is I want people to, read a book like this and say, I'm never again going to say I'm bad at math. Stop their friends from saying I'm bad at math, and be able to very quickly explain for a lot of different issues why it's so important to be good at math and to be thinking about the math that's behind these issues. So the teachers are one part of it, but it's really got to be through all of society. If there was in fact, just reminded me, there was a famous thing a few months ago when there was that whole IRS controversy with the Obama administration, and one of the head people from the IRS was quoted as saying, "I'm not good at math."
Yes, I remember seeing that video clip on television, and that even for somebody like myself who is not good at math, that was an embarrassment to hear.
Right. You know, there's people who aren't good at reading, but they'll never come out and shout it out at the world. So we need to be in the same place with math. No one should be shouting out, I'm bad at math, I'm not good at math. It should be, maybe it's not my favorite thing, but hey, I can handle it. It's not that hard. We can all handle it. And if we think about it, we can do it. And I think that mindset change is really important if we want to have this new self-fulfilling prophecy. And as you mentioned before, in the politics, we see it so much. You read half the statements from people in Congress on either side of the aisle, and you think, did they look at the very simplest idea that's behind that and realize what they said didn't make any mathematical sense at all?
Yes. Now, let me ask you a question that has been an item of debate between my son and I. My son recently graduated from college a couple of years ago in computer engineering. He obviously did not inherit his dad's math issues, and recently was hired by a company that's based in North Dakota. His job title is embedded software engineer. And he and I have an ongoing debate about the importance of understanding the concepts behind math. The reason, and I'm going to go back to the story that I told to myself earlier in grad school with the statistics, one of the reasons that I was able to sort of catch up, if you will, and jump to that skill level in statistics was that I quit trying to understand why the formulae worked, and I remember thinking at the time, think of it as a recipe. Just follow the instructions and you'll get the cake will come out. When I had a discussion with my son when he was an undergrad, towards that same end, he was horrified and basically said that you can't understand mathematics if you don't understand why those things work. Where settle the argument for us. Where's the reality?
Well, I think you're actually both right if you listen to the different ways that you said it there. I mean, the true understanding comes in understanding the concepts that are behind it. But you can also have the utilitarian aspect, right? It's like the house analogy again. You can use a circular saw without understanding how and why the electricity and everything behind it makes it work. If you understand all that, you can do a lot more with it, like design a better circular saw, right? And I think one of the problems that we've had in math education and the debates that have gone back and forth over the years has been people have put these two things as being in conflict, understanding the concepts versus doing the calculation. In fact, they're not in conflict. They're just two sides of the same coin. And oftentimes what I've found is that it's easier for students to learn first how to do the calculations, and later they can learn why they work that way. And again, I think the new Common Core standards do a good job of recognizing this dichotomy and making it so that we shouldn't have that same argument over is it should be this one or that one, when it should actually just be a combination of both.
So I'm going to take another left turn here and go back to your mention of the Common Core and your earlier comment that they've been adopted by 20 states. Is it of concern to you, given what your obvious feeling good and feeling that the Common Core standards are a good thing, is it a concern that they've been adopted by only 20 states?
I don't know the exact number. I think originally there were 40-something states signed on to them, and I don't know how many have gone through the process yet. I'm sure you can look that up easily enough. But yes, I mean, the more that have it, the better. The bigger concern right now is that some states are backing out of it, and as you probably know, that's happening because in some of the early tests, students don't do as well. And people seem surprised and disappointed by that. But of course, when you raise the standards, which is what this does, it takes a while for your teachers and your students to catch up to the new standards. I do believe they will rise to meet those higher standards, rise to meet the expectations. But if you're still working at the old lower level, you're not going to do well the first time you take those tests.
Sure.
And so I don't think people should expect immediate miracles, and I hope it won't cause states to back away from these new standards.
So let me ask you, and this is probably this is a book question, okay? How is the updated version different from the earlier version?
Well, in this particular book, I do a lot with real data, and particularly like I have a chapter on taxes and how taxes work. And so the real data moves quickly. So in the original edition, it was based on data from 2010, basically, and if you're reading the book today, that would look a little bit old and out of date. So the data is all updated to, the latest numbers through 2013. It uses the tax rates from 2013 and so on. So it was mostly a freshening up of the book so that when you're reading it today, it doesn't read like a book from 4 years ago.
Right. Right. So it's been updated that recently. I'm pleasantly surprised to hear that because
it just came out November 1st, and the data I was updating right up into September. So it's fully current.
That's very impressive. That's very impressive. Well, we're down to the last couple minutes. What is your vision of the future on this issue of math education? Where do you think? I know where you want it to go, but on a realistic level, what is your expectation of how this is going to evolve and roll out in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I would have to say, honestly, that it ties in with pretty much everything else in education. And as you already mentioned, the key to education, as study after study has found, comes down to the teachers. So we need to make sure that we're getting excellent teachers into the schools. And we also need to make sure that the training they get as teachers is the right training. And so I think it's a long process, and hopefully we will move down that path and start getting, a higher quality teaching force overall. We have many, many great teachers today, but as you know, today we also have many teachers who are not so great. And hopefully in the future, they'll all be great.
And on that positive note, I'm sorry to say that we are out of time for today. My guest has been Dr. Jeffrey Bennett, who is an astrophysicist and an author of the recently released updated edition of Math for Life, Crucial Ideas You Didn't Learn in School. Jeff, thank you for being our guest on Education Today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Education Today is a project of Quarter Moon Radio in cooperation with the University of California and is recorded in the studios of KUCR-FM 88.3 Riverside with production assistance from Elliot Fong. Opinions expressed on this show belong solely to those who express them. This is your host, Dan Angelo. Thank you for listening, and be sure to be with us next week at this same time for more Education Today.